The scream of tearing metal and the thunderous boom split the quiet night before I even registered what was happening. I slammed on the brakes, my heart leaping into my throat as I watched a fireball streak across the starless sky. A small private jet, trailing smoke and flame, careened low over the dark water of the bay just beyond the coastal road. In a sickening, mesmerizing instant, the aircraft hit the black surface with an explosive hiss of steam. The impact rattled the ground beneath my feet. For a heartbeat, I sat frozen behind the wheel, watching in horror as the broken fuselage bobbed and began to sink into the churning waves. By the time I flung my car door open, adrenaline had burned away the paralysis. I stumbled down toward the rocky shoreline, nearly twisting my ankle on the uneven ground. My pulse roared in my ears. Oh God, oh God. A plane was in the water, and someone might be alive in there. Without a second thought, I yanked my phone from my pocket with shaking hands and dialed 911, shouting breathless details at the dispatcher about a crash off Shoreline Drive, near mile marker 7. The chill ocean wind cut through my thin t-shirt as I tossed the phone aside and kicked off my shoes. There was no time to wait for rescue crews. Every second mattered. Stripping off my heavy hoodie, I plunged into the frigid water. The shock of cold stole the air from my lungs, but I forced myself to keep moving, arms and legs churning through the inky waves. Salt water splashed into my mouth, bitter and briny. Out in the darkness, wreckage loomed, a jagged silhouette against the faint glow of moonlit mist. "Hello!" I shouted between ragged breaths, spitting out seawater. "Is anyone there? Can you hear me?" My voice echoed uselessly over the slap of waves and the low rumble of something burning. A slick of fuel and ash coated the surface, filling my nose with the acrid scent of smoke and chemicals. Coughing, I swam closer, careful to avoid the shards of metal and torn upholstery drifting past. One wing jutted above the water at a crooked angle, like a dying beast's limb. The rest was quickly vanishing into the depths. Think, Ava, think. Gulping a breath, I dove under, eyes open against the salt sting. In the eerie green dimness underwater, I made out the broken cockpit windows and the shadowy form of a man still strapped into a seat. Bubbles leaked from his partly open mouth. He was running out of time. My lungs burned as I fought my way inside through a jagged crack in the fuselage. I grabbed the man's shoulder. His body was limp, head lolling against the seat. Not dead, please, not dead. I hooked an arm under his armpits and yanked. He was wedged by the crumpled console and still buckled in. The plane groaned around us, metal shrieking as water rushed in. Panic beat at the edges of my mind. Fumbling in the dark, I found the seatbelt release and pressed it. The harness gave way and the man's full weight slumped onto me. I nearly lost my grip as the floor tilted sharply. The jet's remained sinking faster now. Kicking hard, I dragged him through the cockpit opening. Broken glass scraped my legs, and the roar of blood in my ears grew louder. "Move, move!" Light exploded in my vision as we burst to the surface. I gasped and coughed, sucking in sweet oxygen. The man's head lolled against my shoulder, but I heard a wet, strangled sound from his throat. A cough. He was breathing, barely. Relief and determination surged through me. Hooking an arm firmly around his chest, I started the arduous swim back to shore, towing him along as waves battered us. My muscles burned and my teeth chattered violently by the time my feet found the rocky shallows. With the last of my strength, I hauled him up onto the pebbled beach. We collapsed just beyond the tide's reach. I rolled him onto his back, ignoring the pain screaming from my shoulders. Moonlight fell across his face, a strong face, pale and unmoving, with a dark slash of eyebrow and sharp cheekbones. He looked mid-30s. A gash on his temple oozed blood, and his skin was deathly gray. I pressed trembling fingers to the side of his neck. Pulse, faint but there. His chest barely rose. Water burbled from his lips. Training kicked in through the haze of panic. Tilt the head, clear the airway. I sealed my mouth over his and gave 2 rescue breaths. His chest rose shallowly beneath his soaked shirt. Positioning my hands, I started compressions. "Come on," I pleaded aloud, voice cracking. "Stay with me. You've got this." After a dozen compressions, he convulsed and coughed up a stream of seawater. I turned his head to the side as he retched weakly, expelling the ocean from his lungs. A shaky laugh of relief escaped me. He was alive. In the distance, faint sirens wailed. Likely the Coast Guard or fire department responding to my call. The man's eyes fluttered open at the sound. Just slits of steely gray beneath heavy lids. His hand suddenly shot out, grabbing my wrist with startling strength. I yelped, nearly falling back. "No, hospital," he rasped. His voice was barely audible, a raw scrape of sound but urgent, An accent, thick and unplaceable in his weakened state, twisted the simple words into a command. No hospital? He must be in shock, not thinking clearly. I leaned closer, trying to enunciate calmly through chattering teeth. You were in a plane crash. You nearly drowned, I said slowly. You need a hospital. His grip tightened painfully on my wrist. Even half-conscious, his eyes bored into mine with ferocity. No, police, please. Each word was labored, desperate. Understanding flickered. He was afraid of the authorities. Instinctively, I glanced over him. A torn, expensive shirt, waterlogged slacks, and under his jacket, a shoulder holster strapped across his chest. The unmistakable shape of a gun was still secured there. My stomach lurched. Who exactly had I just pulled out of that plane? The sirens grew closer, red-blue lights starting to strobe against low clouds over the bay. The man struggled to sit up, grimacing, but he sank back with a stifled groan of pain. He was in no condition to flee, but clearly terrified of being found. I knew nothing about him. He could be a criminal for all I knew, but I'd sworn an oath to do no harm. I couldn't let him die. And right now, keeping him calm and alive was my priority. Mind racing, I made a split-second decision. I cupped his face, making sure he focused on me. All right, I whispered. No hospital. I promise. His brow relaxed a fraction. His hand slipped from my wrist, and he went limp again, eyes sliding closed in relief or exhaustion. My heart thundered. What on earth was I doing? Headlights swung into the turnout by the shore. I had only seconds before first responders swarmed the area. If they found him, he might panic or do something reckless. Jaw set, I scrambled to my feet, cold water streaming off me, and searched the beach. There, a narrow footpath leading up the embankment toward the road where I'd parked. If I could get him into my car before they spotted us. I crouched and hooked my hands under the man's arms. I'm getting you out of here, I murmured, not even sure he could hear. Using every ounce of strength, I began dragging him over the pebbles. Each step was agony. He was impossibly heavy, or maybe I was just drained. Probably both. Up the slope we went, stumbling and slipping on wet grass and sand. Sharp twigs and rocks cut into my bare feet. Behind me, flashlight beams danced over the water as voices shouted. They hadn't spotted us yet, just a little farther. At last, gasping, I reached my car at the side of the road. Propping the man against the passenger door, I managed to wrench it open and lever him inside with great effort. His sodden clothes soaked into the seat. He moaned faintly as I buckled him in, but his eyes stayed closed. A male voice called out from near the beach. Hello? Anyone up there? My blood turned to ice. They were coming up the path. I gently pushed the man's torso down so he slumped out of view behind the dashboard. Then I shut the passenger door and darted around to the driver's side. Snatching up my discarded phone and shoes, I slid in behind the wheel. A flashlight beam swept up the embankment just as I turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, impossibly loud in the still night. For a split second I was sure they'd heard, but a fresh collapse of wreckage out on the bay drew shouts and attention back to the water. Heart hammering, I eased the car forward with headlights off, merging back onto the coastal road. We slipped away into the darkness, leaving the flashing lights and chaos behind. My hands were white-knuckled on the wheel, my wet body shivering violently against the seat. I'd never done anything like that before, fleeing the scene of an accident, hiding a victim from rescue. But as the man beside me drew a rattling breath, I reminded myself why, for better or worse, I had just become this stranger's lifeline. I drove with the heat blasting, trying to keep him warm and conscious. His eyes remained closed, head lolling against the headrest. I talked to him as I drove, rambling reassurances, anything to tether him to this world. Hang in there, okay? You're doing great. I'm taking you somewhere safe. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the gravel driveway of my little rented bungalow on the outskirts of town. The neighborhood was dark and quiet at this late hour. The nearest house was 100 yards away, down the hill. Thank God for small favors. No prying eyes to witness this. I killed the engine and hurried around to the passenger side. The man was slumped against the window, utterly still. Panic prickled until I saw the faint fog of his breath on the glass. Still alive. Getting him out of the car was another battle. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and solidly built. I managed to wrestle one of his arms around my shoulders and coax him to semi-stand, enough to half-drag, half-carry him up the 2 steps to my front door. Almost there, I panted, unsure if it was for his benefit or mine. Inside, I kicked the door shut and guided him to my small living room couch. We collapsed onto it, he in a heap, me tumbling right alongside because I refused to let go. His head ended up in my lap. For a moment I just sat there, breathless and trembling with exhaustion, water pooling at my feet. My wet clothes clung to me, and a puddle was already forming on the hardwood. I needed to get us warm and dry. With a grunt, I shifted out from under him, easing his head onto a throw pillow. He didn't stir beyond a low groan in his chest. In the lamplight, he looked even worse than on the beach. Ashen skin, that gash on his temple still oozing blood, lips tinted blue from cold. I had to act fast. First, I grabbed the fleece blanket draped over the back of the couch and wrapped it tightly around him. Then I stripped off my soaked t-shirt and scrub pants, tossing them aside, and hurried to the bathroom. In record time, I toweled off and pulled on dry sweats and a hoodie, not even bothering with undergarments. As soon as I started warming up, full-body shivers hit. I grit my teeth to keep them from chattering as I rushed back to the living room. The man hadn't moved an inch. I crouched beside the couch and checked his pulse again at his neck. Still there, a little steadier even. His skin felt slightly less icy, thanks to the blanket and blasting heat. Now to assess his injuries. Focus. I was in nurse mode again, training overriding emotion. On the coffee table I kept a basic first aid kit. Being an ER nurse meant always being prepared for scrapes and minor emergencies. Tonight it would have to suffice for a plane crash survivor too. I snapped on latex gloves and gently pushed the blanket down to examine him. His clothes were a mess. A torn white dress shirt, once expensive, now soaked and streaked with blood. Tailored dark slacks. That leather shoulder holster strapped across his broad chest, still holding a sleek handgun. The sight of the weapon made me pause. I'd treated plenty of trauma patients with weapons on them. Cops, even the occasional gang member. But having an armed stranger in my home was a new level of risk. He was unconscious, I reassured myself. I carefully unfastened the holster and set it and the gun aside on the far end of the coffee table. Underneath the holster, I noticed faint scars crisscrossing his lean torso and fresh bruises darkening his left side. Whatever violence had torn into him didn't start or end with the crash. I found a wallet in his back pocket and flipped it open. A thick wad of $100 bills bulged on one side. My eyes widened, and on the other was a New York driver's license. The name read Nikolai Fedorov, age 34. The tiny photo showed a stern-looking, dark-haired man, definitely the man on my couch. There were also a couple of black credit cards with just his name, and a white business card with only a phone number on it. No company or title, nothing to indicate who he really was. I put everything back. Nikolai. The name rolled in my head. Eastern European, maybe Russian. It would explain the accent. But what was a man like this doing on a private jet over the bay in the middle of the night? Questions could wait. I needed to treat him first. Starting with the head wound, I cleaned the cut on his temple with antiseptic wipes. He flinched and made a soft noise as I dabbed at it, but didn't wake. It was a shallow laceration, didn't even need stitches. I pressed a gauze pad to it and taped it down. Next, I ran my hands gently down his arms and along his ribcage, feeling for breaks. He had deep bruising on his left side and hissed softly when I pressed there. Possibly cracked ribs, but not broken, or he'd be in more agony. His right wrist was swollen and purpling, maybe a bad sprain from bracing during the crash. I wrapped it snugly in an elastic bandage. His breathing was stable enough, and his heart beat fast but not alarming. Internal injuries were still a worry, but his abdomen felt soft when I palpated it lightly. Another faint groan from him, but reflexes intact. I realized I'd been holding my breath as I worked, as if any noise might shatter the fragile peace. Here I was, kneeling in my living room at midnight, tending to a mysterious man who carried a gun and clearly lived a dangerous life. The adrenaline of the rescue had faded, replaced by a heavy weight of uncertainty. What now? I couldn't keep him here forever, but I also couldn't just drop him at the ER with a note, "No cops, please." I stood and cranked the thermostat up higher. The house was drafty. The last thing he needed was hypothermia on top of everything. Then I filled a hot water bottle and tucked it beside him under the blanket. Every so often he muttered something in a foreign language, a low rumble of consonants. Russian, I guessed. Once his eyes cracked open, glassy with confusion and pain. He mumbled a word, sounded like "gee" before drifting off again. I hovered, checking that he wasn't becoming delirious. If his brain was swelling or he had a worse head injury than I thought, I needed to know. But after that brief outburst, he went quiet and still. Exhaustion started to drag at me as the crisis adrenaline ebbed. I was drenched, barefoot, and bone-tired. I quickly wiped the remaining sand and damp from my legs, then padded to the kitchen for a glass of water. My throat was raw from the salt and screaming. As I gulped down cool water, I spotted my phone on the counter. A knot of anxiety formed. Multiple missed calls and texts lit the screen. From the 911 dispatcher, from a coworker friend, worried after hearing about a crash on my route home, from my boss wondering why I hadn't shown for my next shift, and from the assisted living center where my grandmother lived. They were checking if I was okay. I saw several worried messages from work and a missed call from my grandmother's nurse. I sent a brief text that I was safe, unable to give details. I turned the phone off right after sending, hoping that was cautious enough. In the pit of my stomach, unease festered. How long could I stay cut off from my normal life? My job, my grandma, they wouldn't just pause because I'd stumbled into something dangerous. I sagged against the counter, overwhelmed by the enormity of what I'd done. I've risked everything for a stranger, but if I hadn't jumped in, he'd be dead. That knowledge offered a grim solace. Whatever came next, at least I'd done something right. I closed all the curtains and double-checked the door lock. Outside, nothing but darkness and the faint sound of sirens near the bay. I returned to the couch and settled into the armchair beside it, wrapping myself in another blanket. I set an alarm on my phone to wake me every hour to check his vitals. It would have to do. As I watched his chest rise and fall in shallow breaths, I couldn't help but think how surreal this was. One moment I was driving home after a long shift, the next I was hiding a possibly dangerous man in my house, tending his wounds by lamplight. My gaze drifted to the small gold ring I wore on a chain around my neck. My dad's wedding band, the only keepsake I had of him. I twisted it between my fingers, seeking comfort. Eventually, despite my best efforts to stay alert, fatigue pulled me under. I drifted into a light, fitful sleep, still sitting in the armchair. The last thing I remember was a half-formed prayer that by morning this man, Nikolai, would still be alive, and maybe could give me some answers. I jolted awake to the sound of engines, a low rumble that reverberated through the early dawn stillness. Disoriented, I blinked and found I'd slid halfway down in the armchair, the blanket tangled around me. Pale gray light filtered through the curtains. The rumble grew louder, joined by the crunch of gravel in my driveway. I shot to my feet, heart climbing into my throat as I realized multiple vehicles were coming up the drive. Still exhausted and muddled with sleep, I pressed a hand to my chest and forced myself into motion. Peeling back the edge of the curtain, I peeked out. Fog clung to the ground, but I counted them easily. 5 black SUVs rolling to a stop in a semicircle around my front yard. They were big and dark with tinted windows, the kind that screamed expensive security. Not police cruisers. That much was obvious. My stomach knotted. This wasn't law enforcement. It felt more like a convoy. Even as I thought it, doors opened in near unison. Men poured out. At least a dozen of them, maybe more. They moved with coordinated precision, fanning out with weapons drawn. I caught the glint of rifles in the dawn light. Fear closed a cold fist over my heart. Who the hell are they? An awful possibility flashed through my mind. The people who tried to kill Nikolai might have tracked him to me. If they knew he survived, if they saw my car leaving the scene. A sharp knock on the front door made me jump. I clapped a hand over my mouth to stifle a yelp. The knock came again, louder, and a deep male voice called, "Ms. Harris, open the door, please." They knew my name. Ice sluiced through my veins. How? Possibly from my license plate or an ID in Nikolai's wallet. Hearing my name in that authoritative bark felt like the world closing in. I crept to the door, barefoot and shaking, and pressed my ear to the wood. My mind raced. They didn't sound like they were about to spray the house with bullets, yet. If they knew my name, maybe they also knew I wasn't a threat. Perhaps they were Nikolai's people coming to get him, or rival cartel hitmen trying to lure me out. My eyes darted to the coffee table, to the gun and holster I'd set there. I wasn't a gun person. I'd only ever fired a weapon once, years ago at a range. Still, seeing those armed men outside, I felt horribly vulnerable. Moving on instinct, I snatched up his gun with clumsy fingers. It was cold and heavy. My hands trembled as I clicked off the safety. What was I thinking? One misfire, and I'd be dead. Cursing under my breath, I carefully set the gun back down, out of sight behind the table. The voice outside came again, sharper now. "Ms. Harris, we just want to ensure your safety and retrieve our friend. Please open the door. We don't want to cause any damage." Retrieve our friend. That choice of words struck me. Maybe they were his allies. Relief and wariness battled inside me. If they were his men, they likely wouldn't hurt me since I'd saved him. But they also might not be gentle if they thought I was keeping their boss against his will. I needed to let them in before they forced their way. Taking a steadying breath, I called through the door. "How do I know you mean it? How do I know you're his people?" A pause. Then the same voice replied, a bit softer. "We traced the vehicle from the crash site to this address. We know you pulled him out of the water. We're here to help, and to ensure you're all right too." My heart slammed against my ribs. They'd found me through my car, of course. These were definitely not random thugs. This was organized, efficient. Very likely his people then. The sense of relief that swept me was dizzying. I quickly undid the deadbolt and chain and opened the door a cautious foot. Two large men in dark suits stood on my porch, each holding a submachine gun angled toward the ground. They tensed, eyes flicking over me, then past my shoulder inside. I raised my hands in a placating gesture. "I'm Ava Harris," I blurted, voice unsteady. Nikolai, is inside. He's alive. I pulled him from the crash. I'm a nurse. He's hurt but stable. Please don't shoot. I was only trying to help." The man nearest me, a blonde with a thin scar on his cheek, inclined his head. His gaze was intense but not hostile. "Ms. Harris, we understand." "Thank you." He jerked his chin at his partner to fully lower his weapon. "May we come in?" I nodded hastily and stepped back. No sooner had I done so than the rest of the team moved swiftly. Two more men appeared, slipping in behind the first pair, while others remained outside, eyes scanning for threats. My cozy living room suddenly felt crowded with tall, armed strangers. "Nikolai," the blonde man breathed, rushing to the couch. He knelt beside his boss and gently touched his shoulder. "Tai Zhivoy." He murmured in Russian, sounded like, "You're alive." Nikolai's eyes cracked open. How long had he been awake? He looked dazed, but managed a ghost of a smile for the blonde. "I'm fine, Kirill," he rasped. "Thanks to Ms. Harris." He turned his head, searching until he found me hovering by the wall. His gaze, though glassy with pain, found mine with a kind of reassurance. Kirill, as the blonde was apparently named, followed his boss's line of sight and gave me a brisk nod of gratitude. Then he was all efficiency, checking Nikolai's bandages and injuries with practiced hands. "We need to move you, boss. It's not secure here." Another man, dark-skinned and stocky, spoke quietly into a mic on his wrist, coordinating something. "Route clear. Bring the van and Dr. Sokolov up." At the mention of a doctor, I felt an unexpected stab of protectiveness. "He's stable right now," I interjected, stepping forward. I treated his injuries as best I could. No hospital, per his request, but he still needs monitoring for complications. Kirill glanced up at me. At first his face was impassive, but something in my tone must have impressed him because he nodded. "Understood. We have a safe location with medical facilities. We'll take it from here." I bit my lip, anxiety flaring. After everything, I wasn't sure I could just hand Nikolai off and walk away. But what choice did I have? I'd done my part. Now his own people, professionals by the look of it, could care for him properly. This was where my involvement should end, right? Two men returned with a stretcher and a medical kit. Under Kirill's guidance, they eased Nikolai onto the stretcher. He gritted his teeth, stifling a groan as the movement jostled his injuries. I instinctively moved in to help, holding the IV bag one of them had started and cautioning, "Careful of his left side. Possible cracked ribs." Kirill gave me a look of faint surprise but adjusted his grip accordingly. Once Nikolai was strapped in, they lifted the stretcher. He caught my hand in that moment, gripping weakly. "You saved me," he said, voice strained but firm. His storm gray eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that pinned me in place. "Thank you." Emotion swelled in my chest. I squeezed his hand. "Just rest. You're going to be okay." He nodded, releasing me as they started moving toward the door. I followed, heart twisting unexpectedly. It felt wrong to watch them take him away, even though it was the logical outcome. They rolled the stretcher to a waiting SUV that had backed up to my porch. It looked like they'd converted it into a makeshift ambulance, medical equipment and monitors ready inside. A gray-haired man in a sweater vest, the doctor, climbed in and began checking Nikolai's vitals with brisk competence. Kirill gestured for me to get into the back seat of the same SUV. I hesitated, hugging my arms to myself. Around us, the other men were fanning out, finishing a perimeter sweep, already in professional mode. If I went with them, I'd be leaving everything familiar behind and putting myself entirely in their hands. If I stayed, well, I wasn't even sure that was an option. Nikolai, apparently overhearing something through the open back hatch, lifted a hand weakly. "Ava, come," he rasped. That settled it. Deciding I'd come this far, I climbed into the back seat. Kirill took the driver's seat, another guard riding shotgun. The convoy roared to life. As we rolled away from my little house, I caught a glimpse of myself in the side mirror. Pale face, hair a wild tangle, eyes wide with fatigue and uncertainty. Less than 12 hours ago, I was a nobody finishing a long ER shift. Now I was entangled with a man who had an armed entourage and dangerous enemies. I turned in my seat, meeting Nikolai's gaze through the open partition. He offered me the faintest reassuring nod before closing his eyes as the doctor murmured to him. I faced forward again and took a steady breath. The sun was just cresting the horizon, painting streaks of gold and pink across the sky. A beautiful, indifferent morning for the start of a very uncertain day. The convoy had been driving for maybe 20 minutes, and I was only beginning to unclench my fists when it happened. We were on a 2-lane highway that cut through rolling hills and dense pine forest, heading away from town. Kirill drove with steely focus, not speeding but not dawdling. One SUV led ahead of us, another behind, and 2 flanked at a distance. I kept glancing back at Nikolai. He looked pale and exhausted on the stretcher, but he gave me a tiny nod or half smile whenever our eyes met, as if to comfort me. The doctor adjusted an IV in his arm, and the guard in the passenger seat, Anton, I caught his name, scanned the road vigilantly. Tension hung thick. These men clearly expected trouble. They were right. Trouble found us. One moment we were cresting a hill under the early sun. The next, the lead SUV screeched to a halt, tires smoking. Kirill cursed and braked hard. I lurched, forward against my seatbelt as our SUV skidded to a stop. Ahead, I saw why. The road was blocked by 2 black pickup trucks. Men with rifles stood in their beds. It was an ambush. Everything erupted at once. Muzzle flashes burst from the blockade as the gunmen opened fire. Pop, pop, pop. The lead SUV's windshield exploded into spiderweb cracks. Kirill yanked the wheel, trying to reverse or turn us around, but more trucks had boxed us in from the rear. We were trapped in a kill zone. "Down!" Anton shouted, twisting toward the back. He shoved me low, just as a bullet pinged off the frame where my head had been. I slid onto the floorboard, heart in my throat, curling into a ball. The air filled with deafening cracks of gunfire and the thunk of rounds hitting metal. Our armored SUV absorbed most of it, but the rear window shattered, raining glass. Voices shouted in Russian and Spanish. Our escort vehicles responded with gunfire of their own. The crack of their rifles was ear-splitting in the confined space. I peeked over the dash in time to see one of the attackers topple from a truck bed, hit by a precise shot from our side. A piercing bang suddenly jolted the SUV. We lurched violently. "Tires!" Kirill snapped, fighting the wheel as our ride turned wobbly. A tire must have blown out. Another blast, and the front passenger window blew inward. Anton grunted, jerking back with a spray of blood. I gasped. Anton was hit. He slumped, choking out a groan as he pressed a hand to his vest, which was now red. I crawled up from the floor, instincts flaring. Glass bit into my palms, but I hardly felt it. "Hold on," Kirill shouted. He floored the accelerator, steering straight at one of the pickups ahead. I barely had time to grab a handle before we crashed into it. The crunch of metal and squeal of tires was jarring. Our heavy SUV smashed the smaller truck aside, clearing a narrow gap. "Go, go!" Kirill barked into his radio. The lead SUV, battered but moving, gunned forward through the opening. Our SUV followed close behind on its damaged wheel. The remaining escort vehicles laid down covering fire, strafing the tree line and the other truck. Amid the chaos, I heard a strangled noise beside me. Anton. Blood seeped between his fingers where he clutched his shoulder. Without thinking, I tore off my hoodie, wadded it up, and pressed it against his wound. He grimaced but gave a grateful nod, keeping his pistol ready in his other hand. Behind us, gunfire still raged. I twisted around to look through the shattered rear window. One of our SUVs had been rammed into a ditch, and a few of our men were pinned down behind it, exchanging fire with attackers. We couldn't stop. If we did, we'd all be slaughtered. A sudden struggle in the back drew my attention. Through the partition, I saw Nikolai had partially freed himself from the stretcher straps. He grabbed the doctor's sidearm with one hand while bracing himself with the other. Before I could comprehend what he was doing, he aimed through the broken back window and bang, shot an attacker who had climbed onto our rear bumper. The man flew off and disappeared. Nikolai slumped back, the gun slipping from his grasp, chest heaving from exertion. Our eyes met through the partition. Even half dead, he managed a determined nod. Gunfire and shouts echoed as the firefight raged around us. Our escort's furious return fire tore into the attackers, and the remaining ambushers started to scatter. Realizing their kill box wasn't going as planned, they peeled out in their trucks, fleeing into the woods. Within minutes, we had left the ambush site behind, racing down the winding road as fast as our wounded SUV allowed. Silence descended, broken only by Anton's labored breathing and my own pounding heart. I realized I was practically on top of Anton, still pressing my bundled hoodie to his wound. "Just hang on," I whispered. The bleeding seemed to be slowing, probably a through and through that his vest had partially caught. He managed a tight, pain-tinged smile. "Will do." We turned off the highway onto a narrow gravel lane. After a few more tense minutes, the convoy slowed. I peered out the shattered window. We were approaching a high wrought iron gate camouflaged by hedges. Beyond it, up a winding drive, lay a sprawling estate, a cream-colored mansion surrounded by gardens and high walls. It looked like a fortress masquerading as a palace. Guards at the gate waved us through after a quick check. As we rolled onto the property, I let myself sink back into the seat. My muscles felt like jelly. The adrenaline crash was hitting. Only now did I notice the stinging cuts on my hands and face from shattered glass, and that I was clad in just a tank top after sacrificing my hoodie. A soft groan came from the stretcher. Nikolai. I turned to see him watching me from the back, concern etched on his drawn face. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice rough with pain and worry. I opened my mouth to say I was fine, but the words caught. The enormity of what just happened slammed into me. I had just been in a gunfight. I had someone else's blood on my hands. A half-sob, half-laugh of disbelief bubbled out. I'm okay, I managed, which felt like the understatement of the century. His eyes searched mine, as if verifying for himself. "You did well," he murmured, a fierce kind of pride in his tone that warmed me despite everything. Before I could respond, the vehicle stopped in front of the mansion's grand entrance. Staff and more guards swarmed out. Kirill and another man jumped out to open the back. They carefully slid Nikolai's stretcher onto a waiting gurney. The doctor hopped out, coordinating with a nurse from inside who'd come running. In moments, they whisked Nikolai through the double doors, likely to an in-house medical suite. "Come on, we have you," a medic said to Anton, who was trying, and failing, to push himself out of the SUV. I realized I was still hovering protectively at Anton's side. one hand on his good shoulder. Gently, I relinquished him to the professionals who helped him onto another gurney. As they hurried him inside, I stumbled out of the SUV and stood there in a daze. Kirill was barking orders about lockdown procedures and checking on the men from the crashed vehicle. My knees wobbled, and suddenly the solid ground of the estate felt like it was tilting. Kirill paused to stride over to me. His own suit was torn, a bruise swelling on his jaw, but he looked otherwise intact. "Miss Harris, are you all right?" he asked, eyes taking in my disheveled, blood-spattered state. "I'm not injured," I replied shakily. "Just shaken up." He nodded, tension around his eyes softening slightly. We didn't anticipate an attack so soon. They must have known our route. His jaw ticked, anger and something like betrayal flashing across his face. "We'll deal with that later. For now, you'll be safe here. The estate is secure." His tone was firm, trying to reassure. I glanced up at the imposing mansion. It was beautiful and intimidating all at once, with its tall windows and stone facade. "Where exactly is here?" "One of Mr. Fedorov's properties. Consider it a safe house," Kirill said. "You'll be our guest until things settle down." Guest. The word carried a lot of weight. Protected, yes, but also not exactly free to walk away. I swallowed hard and nodded. "Okay." He guided me up the marble steps and into the lion's den, though given what lay outside, these walls felt more like sanctuary than prison at the moment. Inside was a flurry of controlled chaos. Staff members speaking in hushed tones, someone rushing off with a used medical kit, guards fanning out to positions. The interior was grand, all polished wood and marble, but I barely registered details as Kirill led me down a hall. A housekeeper intercepted us with a worried look. Kirill murmured something in Russian, and she immediately nodded and disappeared, presumably to arrange quarters for me. Moments later, I was being ushered into a spacious guest suite on the ground floor. It was all tasteful creams and golds, with a 4-poster bed and sitting area by tall windows overlooking a manicured garden. Under other circumstances, I might have been awed. The housekeeper returned with a first aid kit and personally cleaned and bandaged the small cuts on my arms and face. She then pressed a set of fresh clothes into my hands, a simple pair of jeans and a soft blue sweater, and pointed me to an attached bathroom to shower. I was reluctant at first to be away from the action, but Kirill gently insisted I take a moment to care for myself. He assured me he'd come get me when Nikolai was stable and wanted to see me. The hot shower was almost enough to make me cry. As the water sluiced away the blood and grime, I watched reddish water spiral down the drain and thought, what if I hadn't jumped into that bay last night? My life would still be normal. Boring even. Instead, I was here, wherever here was, caught in the crossfire of a criminal war. Yet I couldn't bring myself to regret it. Dressed in the clean clothes, I felt a bit more human. A bruise on my left hip and some sore muscles were the worst of my injuries. When I emerged, I found a tray of sandwiches and hot tea waiting on the coffee table. My stomach growled. I realized I hadn't eaten since yesterday's lunch. I sank onto the sofa, nibbling a sandwich without tasting it and sipping the chamomile tea. Alone in the quiet suite, the reality of the last 24 hours finally pressed in. I leaned forward, burying my face in my hands for a moment. What now, Ava? My old life felt a million miles away. How would I explain this absence to my boss? To my grandmother? Sorry, I was busy being chased by cartel hitmen. Not exactly a valid excuse. A tentative knock at the door made me sit up and hastily swipe at my eyes. Yes, a few overwhelmed tears had squeezed out. Kirill stepped in, looking visibly relieved to find me composed. "Ms. Harris," he said, almost smiling. "Nikolai is awake and asking for you." I released a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and nodded. "Lead the way." He brought me through a maze of hallways to another wing of the mansion. 2 guards stood outside a set of double doors, which opened into what looked like a bedroom converted into a recovery room. Medical monitors hummed and an IV bag hung on a stand. Nikolai lay propped against a mountain of pillows on a king-sized bed, bare-chested under a loose hospital gown. Bandages wrapped his middle and one shoulder, but he looked markedly better, cleaned up and more alert, an IV in his arm delivering fluids or pain meds. The medical staff quietly stepped out as I approached. Suddenly unsure of my place, I hovered a few feet from the bed. "Hi," I ventured softly. "You're looking better." One corner of his mouth lifted in a semblance of a smile. "I hear I have you to thank for that once again," he said. His voice was still rough but stronger. I shrugged, managing a small smile. I had some help this time. His eyes, clearer now and fixed intently on me, seemed to drink in the sight of me, as if reassuring himself I was really all right. "Come, sit," he said, nodding toward a chair beside the bed. I moved closer and sat down, conscious of his gaze following my every step. Up close, I could see the exhaustion still shadowing his face, and lines of pain etched around his eyes. Despite that, he radiated a steady, commanding presence. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I wasn't even sure why my heart was pounding. We'd been through literal hell together in the last day. Maybe that was bonding enough to make silence comfortable. Nikolai was the one to finally break it. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I blinked. "For what?" "For everything you've been put through because of me." His jaw tightened, a flash of anger, at himself, it seemed, crossing his face. "I never wanted an innocent dragged into this." I shook my head. "You didn't drag me. I made my choice down on that beach." I offered a tentative smile. "If anything, I probably dragged you." He huffed a quiet breath, almost a laugh. "Still, you saved my life. Twice now, if I count that stunt you pulled in the car." He gave me a pointed look, as if both impressed and reproachful that I had shielded him with my own body during the ambush. A blush crept up my neck. "I just didn't want to see you hurt," I mumbled. His hardened expression gentled. "Ava, you've been unbelievably brave and kind. I owe you a debt." He paused, choosing his words. "In my culture, saving a life creates a bond. A debt of honor that must be repaid." "I didn't save you to make you owe me anything," I protested softly, meeting his eyes. "I know," he said, voice solemn. "That is why repaying it means all the more to me." He shifted, suppressing a grimace as he tried to sit higher. I instinctively reached out to help adjust his pillows, and he gave me a grateful nod. Settled, he continued. "I promise you, on my life, no harm will come to you for what you've done. I will make sure of it." "I believe you," I replied, and I meant it. Despite everything, my gut told me I could trust this man, at least with my safety. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Good," he exhaled slowly. "I regret that you're now entangled in my mess. My enemies will have noticed you." A chill prickled my skin. "They came after us awfully fast." His expression grew taut. "They had inside information. Someone on my team betrayed me. We're handling that." The venom in his tone at the word betrayed left no doubt that whoever it was would soon regret it. I recalled Kirill's flicker of anger and realized Nikolai likely already suspected who the mole was. I hesitated, then had to ask. "The men who attacked us. Kirill said something about the Escobar cartel?" Nikolai's eyes hardened. "Diego Escobar. He runs a major cartel south of the border. We had business conflicts. He tried to have me killed before, but not so directly." He gestured to his bandaged shoulder. "This time he nearly succeeded. The plane crash. Someone must have sabotaged or shot down his jet." A ripple of anger went through me on his behalf. "Well, he failed, and now he's made it my business too." A wry smile curled Nikolai's lips. "That almost sounds like you're volunteering." I realized how that came out and flushed. "I just mean, I won't run off and blab or anything. I want to help if I can. After all, I'm sort of on your side now." He regarded me with an unreadable expression, then gently reached over and took my hand. My breath caught at the warm, solid clasp of his fingers around mine. "You've helped more than I can ever repay," he said, voice low. "But I may still ask a favor." "Anything," I said before thinking, and his brow lifted in faint surprise at my eagerness. I tried to recover. I mean, within reason. That earned me a genuine, if small, smile. He looked down at our joined hands, thumb absently stroking along the back of mine, sending a pleasant tingle up my arm. "When I'm recovered, I'd like to properly thank you. Perhaps over dinner, if you'd allow." I blinked. Of all things, I hadn't expected him to ask that. Was Nikolai Fedorov, Mafia boss deadly and formidable, nervously asking me on a date? A flutter awakened in my stomach that had nothing to do with fear. I think I'd like that. He lifted my hand and, to my shock, brushed a kiss over my knuckles. The old-world gesture, combined with the heat of his lips on my skin, made my heart do a strange little flip. His eyes met mine from beneath dark lashes. Then it's a promise. A knock at the door jolted us. We both turned as Kirill poked his head in, looking apologetic. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation. Nikolai's demeanor shifted in an instant, businesslike and cold. What is it? He asked. Kirill glanced at me, clearly reluctant to speak freely in front of an outsider. Something on the south perimeter. Could be nothing, but it might be a diversion. Nikolai muttered a curse in Russian and reluctantly released my hand. I'll be there. As Kirill withdrew, Nikolai looked back to me, frustration and concern warring on his face. I need to deal with this. Please stay here where it's safe. I nodded, though inside I bristled at the idea of being sequestered again. Be careful. He managed a faint, reassuring smirk. Always. Then, in a move that sent heat rushing to my cheeks, he leaned forward and pressed a swift, soft kiss to my forehead, a promise sealed in warmth. I sat frozen for a second as he departed with Kirill, flanked by 2 guards. The room suddenly felt colder without him. I didn't want to just wait passively, but I also knew I'd likely only be in the way if something was going down. Still, anxiety gnawed at me. I paced the room for a minute, then stepped out into the hall. The guards who had been stationed there were gone, probably redeployed to check the perimeter breach. Chewing my lip, I wandered down the corridor, telling myself I was just familiarizing with the house and definitely not snooping. Before I realized it, my feet had carried me toward the wing where my room was. I passed a side door slightly ajar that led to a small interior courtyard. That's when I heard it, a muffled shout and the thud of a struggle coming from outside. Heart-lurching, I edged through the door into the courtyard. Early morning light revealed 2 figures scuffling near an archway that led out to the rear gardens. I recognized one as one of Nikolai's perimeter guards. The other was a stocky man in dark clothes, with a buzz cut. My blood ran cold. Yuri, one of Nikolai's men from the convoy. He had the guard in a chokehold. Before I could move or cry out, Yuri slammed the guard against the stone wall. The guard went limp and crumpled to the ground. Yuri whirled and spotted me standing there, mouth agape. His eyes widened with surprise, then gleamed with satisfaction. He'd been caught in the act of betrayal and didn't even care. Well, look who's here, he drawled, taking a step toward me. I didn't think. I bolted back for the door. I wasn't fast enough. Yuri lunged and grabbed my arm in a bruising grip. Let go, I yelped, twisting in vain. Panic surged like ice in my veins. He yanked me against him, a forearm across my collarbone from behind to lock me in place. I felt the press of a knife suddenly against my side. Scream and I'll cut you, he hissed in my ear. Terror flashed white-hot through me. My gaze darted wildly. I saw other shapes moving just beyond the archway. More armed men filtering in. They must have slipped over the wall during whatever diversion was happening at the south perimeter. The mole had thrown the gates wide open from within. Yuri began dragging me toward the arch. I dug my heels in, resisting with every ounce of strength. You won't get away with this, I spat, even as my voice shook. He just laughed under his breath. Oh, I think we will. Your boyfriend walked into one trap for you. He'll do it again. There was a prick at my neck. A needle? I gasped, trying to jerk free, but it was too late. Something cold flooded my veins. My limbs went leaden and the world tilted. No, I moaned, the fight draining out of me. Yuri caught me as my knees buckled. Easy now, he said almost gently, hauling me up over his shoulder. I was dimly aware of him carrying me through the archway into the garden. My vision blurred. Sleepiness, no, unconsciousness clawed at me. The last thing I saw before darkness took me was Yuri's boots crunching over the gravel path and a line of black-clad cartel gunmen fanning out across Nikolai's rose garden. I woke to a hard metal chair and the sting of icy water thrown in my face. Gasping, I jerked upright, blinking water out of my eyes. My arms wouldn't move. They were tied tightly behind me. I looked around wildly, heart pounding. A dingy warehouse, harsh fluorescent lights overhead. The smell of oil, rust, and something chemical. Gasoline. Dozens of stacked crates and barrels. And armed men, at least a dozen, positioned around. A tall man stepped forward, tossing aside a now empty bucket. He wore a tan suit, impeccably pressed despite the grimy surroundings, and had slicked back iron-gray hair. A thin scar cut through his left eyebrow. He gave me a cordial smile that did not reach his cold, dark eyes. My stomach flipped with recognition. He matched Kirill's brief description. Diego Escobar. Welcome back, señorita. Escobar said, tone almost jovial. He crouched before me, and one of his men handed him a pistol, which he casually inspected. A pleasure to finally meet the little nurse who saved Nikolai Fedorov. I glared, throat dry. Where's Kirill? What did you do to him? Escobar arched a brow, then made a careless gesture. 2 of his goons dragged something out of the shadows, Kirill. They dumped him to the concrete floor, not far from me. He was alive, but looked awful, hands bound, face bloody and swollen from a beating. He caught my gaze and managed a rough, pained, "I'm sorry, Ava." Yuri appeared behind Kirill, gun in hand and a proud sneer on his face. "Quiet, Pero," he growled, stepping forward and striking Kirill across the head with his pistol. Kirill slumped, barely conscious. Rage boiled up in me. "Yuri, you traitor!" I shouted. "After all his family did for you." Yuri's sneer twisted. "His family, not mine. I did what I had to." Escobar chuckled, drawing my attention back. Loyalty is such a fickle thing, no? Money, however, money is reliable. He stood and closed the distance between us, the heels of his expensive shoes clicking on the floor. With disturbing gentleness, he brushed a wet strand of hair from my face. I tried to jerk back, but there was nowhere to go. "What do you want?" I demanded, injecting far more bravado than I felt. My heart was a wild drumbeat in my chest. Escobar's smile sharpened. "I want to watch Salvatore Russo burn." He noted my confusion and waved it off. Ah, that was Nikolai's predecessor. But Nikolai, he's proven annoyingly resilient. His eyes flicked down to the rose gold bracelet still on my wrist, the one Nikolai had given me. Escobar's smile soured. He even found himself a pretty little guardian angel. I swallowed hard. "I'm nobody. You could just let us go," he barked a laugh. "Nikolai made it my business when he killed my son." His voice dropped to a near hiss. "So I will make this very personal for him. He took someone I love. I'll take someone he," Escobar smirked knowingly, "is starting to love." My breath caught. The certainty with which he said it, as if it were a fact, sent equal parts fear and warmth through me. I didn't have time to analyze it, though, because Escobar straightened and snapped his fingers. One of his men brought him a phone. Escobar dialed, then put it on speaker. It rang only once. "Nikolai Fedorov," Escobar practically sang into the device. "How good of you to pick up." My heart seized. I heard Nikolai's voice, faint but taut with barely controlled fury. "Escobar, if you've heard her, oh, she's alive," Escobar cooed. He gestured and Yuri yanked my head back by the hair. I gasped in pain. "Ava!" Nikolai's voice came sharply. "I'm here!" I managed to shout before Yuri clamped a hand over my mouth. Escobar chuckled. "Hear that? Safe and sound for now." The muzzle of his pistol suddenly pressed under my chin. I froze, eyes wide. "Listen closely, Fedorov. You will come to the old docks warehouse, unarmed and alone, in the next 10 minutes. If I even smell a trap, I will paint the floor with her brains. Understood?" There was a heartbeat of silence. When Nikolai answered, his voice was a lethal calm I barely recognized. "If you harm her, there won't be a hole on this earth deep enough for you to hide in, Diego." Escobar grinned like a shark. "Tick-tock, my friend." He ended the call and tucked the phone away. "Positions, everyone!" he called out gaily, clearly pleased with himself. His men took cover behind crates and pillars, rifles trained toward the big sliding entry door of the warehouse. Yuri dragged Kirill off to one side and secured him to a support beam. Then he moved to stand in the shadows just behind me. I felt the cold barrel of his gun press against the back of my skull. Insurance. Escobar remained in view, pacing leisurely with his pistol held loosely at his side. I had to do something, anything, but with my wrists lashed to the chair and a gun to my head, I was utterly helpless. Time ticked by in agonizing slowness. Finally, the sound of an engine approached outside. I held my breath. "Please, Nikolai, don't come. Or if you do, have a plan." The massive sliding door creaked open, sunlight spilling into the warehouse, and there he was. Nikolai stepped inside, coat billowing slightly with the morning breeze. He was alone, as demanded. I bit back a cry of both relief and fear at the sight of him walking into this death trap for me. He stopped a few yards in, stance loose, but I could see the coiled tension in his frame. His eyes scanned the dim interior, adjusting to the light. "Ava!" he called, voice echoing. Then he spotted me. Our gazes met, and something in his face cracked, raw concern flashing across it before he masked it. "That's far enough," Escobar warned. He emerged from behind a stack of crates, pistol casually aimed in Nikolai's direction. Two of his henchmen flanked him with rifles raised. Nikolai's jaw tightened, but he held his hands out slightly, showing they were empty. "You have me, Diego, let them go," Escobar tisked. "Not quite yet. Toss any weapons now, or my man blows her pretty head off." Nikolai slowly reached into his coat, pulled out a handgun and tossed it clattering across the floor. He raised his arm slightly again. "I'm unarmed." "Satisfied?" I saw his eyes flick briefly above and around. Was he surveying positions, or maybe hoping he'd hidden backup like on the convoy? I discreetly glanced upward and caught a glimpse of movement in the rafters. He didn't come alone after all. Escobar motioned, and one of his men patted Nikolai down roughly, then stepped back and nodded. "Bueno," Escobar smirked. "Now where were we?" "Ah yes, vengeance." "Diego," Nikolai said evenly, "your quarrel is with me. Let her go." Escobar moved behind me, resting his free hand almost affectionately on my shoulder. I flinched. "You care about this woman, Nikolai? After mere days?" He chuckled. "Touching. It will make this so much more poignant." Nikolai took a step forward, anger rippling across his face. Instantly, a dozen guns clicked as Escobar's men aimed at him. He halted. "Yuri," Escobar called. "Come say hello." From behind me, Yuri stepped into Nikolai's view, keeping his pistol trained on me. Nikolai's eyes narrowed to slits. "I see," he said quietly. "It was you." Yuri shrugged, an insolent grin on his lips. "Nothing personal, boss. You were just on the losing side of the deal." Nikolai's knuckles cracked from how hard he clenched his fists. "I welcomed you into my home. You ate at my table." A flash of something, regret, crossed Yuri's face, but it vanished as quick as it came. "And now I'll eat at Diego's. He set a richer table." My pulse thrummed anxiously. Hidden above on the steel catwalks, I could barely discern a couple of Nikolai's men lying prone with rifles. Waiting for the right moment, no doubt. But as long as Yuri was right behind me and Escobar beside me, any shot could kill me. Escobar apparently felt invincible. He came around to face Nikolai fully, dragging me forward by the chair with one hand until I was positioned in front of him like a human shield, his pistol now pressed to my temple. Yuri moved aside, keeping his aim on Nikolai. "Your reign ends today, Fedorov," Escobar declared. "Any last words?" Nikolai's eyes met mine. I could see the fear he was holding back. Not for himself, but for me. Slowly, he lowered his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Just let her go, Diego," he said, voice low and intense. "She's innocent. You have me. Kill me if you want, but let her go." My throat tightened. The idea of him offering himself up like that. Escobar sneered. "Where's the fun in that? No. You will watch her die first, then I'll finish you." "An eye for an eye!" His finger tightened on the trigger. Time slowed to a crawl. I realized in that crystal-clear moment that no deus ex machina was coming to save us. If I wanted to protect Nikolai as he had me, I had to act now. Yuri had moved a few steps to the side, watching Nikolai with laser focus. Escobar loomed behind me. My wrists strained against the ropes, no give. But my fingers, they brushed the edge of something tucked into the waist of my jeans at my lower back. Something small, metallic, the scalpel from the first aid kit. I remembered sliding it in my waistband when I changed earlier, out of habit. By some miracle, the goons hadn't searched me thoroughly. Keeping my movement slight, I inched the scalpel free and twisted it in my hands to start sawing at the rope binding my wrists. The blade was tiny and my position awkward, but the strands began to give way, fiber by fiber. Above, a faint click sounded, someone flicking the safety off on a rifle. Escobar heard and jerked his head up. "Shoot them!" he screamed. Everything happened at once. A sniper's rifle cracked from the rafters, taking out one of Escobar's men in a burst of red. Gunfire erupted, a thunderous cacophony. Bullets pinged off metal and sent wood splinters flying. Escobar cursed and yanked me up out of the chair, spinning us both behind a concrete pillar for cover. I felt the barrel of his gun dig hard into my temple now, his arm like a vice around my neck from behind. Across the open floor, Nikolai dove and rolled behind a stack of crates as shots riddled the spot where he'd stood. Yuri sprinted toward him, firing wildly. Nikolai popped up just long enough to send a shot back, winging Yuri's leg. Yuri crashed to a knee with a snarl, returning fire. A high catwalk above us groaned. One of Escobar's men with a machine gun had climbed up to flank Nikolai's snipers. He sprayed the rafters, forcing one of our shooters to drop from his perch to a lower platform. The man landed badly with a cry. My wrists were slick with sweat and blood from chafing, but at last the rope gave way. My hands were free. I had one desperate chance. With Escobar's attention focused on coordinating his men, I carefully shifted my grip on the scalpel and then drove it backward with everything I had, straight into Escobar's forearm. He bellowed in pain, his hold loosening reflexively as the blade bit deep. I didn't hesitate. I tore myself out of his grip and dove forward, landing hard and rolling behind a steel barrel just as Escobar's pistol went off. A bullet sparked off the concrete floor inches from my leg. "Nikolai!" I screamed, unsure if he could hear me in the din. I peered around the barrel. Escobar was hunched, blood running down his forearm, fury contorting his face. He raised his gun at me again, eyes wild. Before he could shoot, a shadow sprinted in from the side. Nikolai. He barreled into Escobar with bone-crunching force. They fell to the ground in a grapple. Yuri, limping but determined, appeared behind Nikolai, knife drawn and eyes blazing. I scrambled up and snatched a fallen handgun from under a dead man's outstretched arm. My hands shook. God, I barely knew how to use one of these. But I had to do something. I braced it in two hands and shouted, "Nikolai, behind you!" He reacted instantly, breaking away from Escobar and twisting just as Yuri lunged. Face. Cartilage crunched. Yuri stumbled back, blood gushing from his shattered nose. Nikolai yanked the knife from his arm with a grimace, then in one smooth motion, slashed it across Yuri's throat. Yuri's eyes went wide. He crumpled to the ground, clutching his neck as blood gushed through his fingers. "Nikolai!" I cried again. He whirled and spotted me, relief flooding his face seeing I was free. But behind him, Escobar had risen, teeth bared in a rictus of rage. He raised his pistol at Nikolai's back, finger on the trigger. I didn't think, I fired. The recoil nearly wrenched the gun from my hands, but my bullet hit true, catching Escobar in the chest. He staggered, eyes going glassy with shock. Nikolai, realizing what happened, turned just in time to see the cartel boss fall heavily to the ground. Escobar's gun clattered from his hand. Everything went eerily quiet. The only sounds were Escobar's wet gasps and the crackle of a small fire starting where a stray bullet had ignited a puddle of fuel. His remaining men either lay dead or had fled. I lowered the pistol with shaking arms. It thudded to the floor from my limp fingers. Holy hell, I'd shot someone! Nikolai rushed to my side, ignoring his own bleeding arm. His hands cupped my face, tilting it up. "Ava, are you okay?" His eyes searched mine frantically, as if disbelieving I was really standing there. I let out a choked sob and threw my arms around him. "I'm fine," I managed, voice thick. "You?" He exhaled a breath that was almost a laugh and crushed me against him. "Nothing that won't heal." I could feel him trembling slightly as he pressed his lips to my hair. "You were incredible." Sirens wailed in the distance. Likely someone in the area heard the firefight and called the cops. Nikolai gently pulled back, studying me one more time from head to toe, as if assuring himself I was truly unharmed. "We need to go," he said softly. He slipped off his long black coat and draped it around my shoulders, covering the rope still hanging from my wrists and the blood splattered on my clothes. Kiro limped over, bruised but upright. Behind him, one of Nikolai's snipers helped the other walk, both of them banged up but alive. We were all alive. Nikolai kept an arm firmly around me as we hurried out to an SUV the snipers had arrived in. He paused only once, over Escobar's body. The cartel boss stared sightlessly at the ceiling, a pool of blood widening beneath him. Nikolai's face was unreadable as he towed Escobar's gun far away from any twitch of life, then guided me onward. We sped out of the warehouse district just minutes ahead of flashing red-blue lights. Only when those faded behind us did the knot in my chest finally loosen. I leaned against Nikolai in the back seat, and he wrapped me in both arms, burying his face against my hair. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The way he held me said everything. You're safe. It's over. Tears of relief stung my eyes. It was over. The man who'd tried to destroy us was gone, and against all odds we had survived. 1 week later. The late afternoon sun painted the ocean in glittering gold as I stood on the villa's balcony, salty breeze ruffling my hair. Waves lapped gently at the shoreline below, a soothing soundtrack far removed from the chaos of a week ago. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth sink in. We had come a long way in a short time, literally and figuratively. After that harrowing rescue at the warehouse, Nikolai wasted no time whisking us out of the city to this secluded coastal villa. With Escobar gone, the worst of the danger was behind us. The cartel's remaining leadership quickly went to ground, and Nikolai brokered a tense truce that held them at bay. As for the authorities, any legal entanglements quietly evaporated. I suspected Nikolai's influence helped ensure my name stayed out of it entirely. "Thought I'd find you here," came Nikolai's voice from behind me. I turned, smiling. He leaned against the balcony doorway, a relaxed figure in a white linen shirt and trousers. The setting sun gilded the edges of his dark hair. He looked healthier, wounds healing, color returned to his face. Only a sling supporting his bandaged arm and a few healing bruises hinted at what we'd been through. I held out a mug of tea I'd poured for him. "Join me." He crossed over and took the mug, but instead of drinking, set it down and slipped his good arm around my waist. I nestled into his side with a content sigh. We stood a moment in comfortable silence, watching the waves shimmer. "How are you feeling?" I asked, tilting my head up at him. His gaze was soft. "Grateful," he said simply. I arched a brow. "For what?" His hand gently grasped my chin and he leaned down, pressing a tender kiss to my lips. "This," he murmured. "You. Alive. Here with me." My heart fluttered, the last of the week's nightmares melting away under the warmth of that kiss. I wrapped my arms around his neck, careful of his healing shoulder, and deepened it. We had kissed countless times since that day, but each one still felt as electric and precious as the first. When we finally parted, I rested my forehead against his, smiling. "I'm not going anywhere, you know." His arm tightened around me just slightly. "I might still keep a few guards on you just in case," he teased, though there was truth in the protectiveness that never quite left his eyes. I pretended to sigh in exasperation. "Overprotective much?" "You'll forgive me," he said, smirking. Then his expression grew serious, voice dropping to a raw whisper. "Ava, I nearly lost you. I don't ever want to feel that way again." My chest ached at the memory of his face when he thought Escobar was about to pull that trigger. I cupped his cheek, brushing a thumb over a faint scar there. "We're safe now," I said softly. "Together." He turned his head to press a kiss into my palm. "Together," he echoed. We stood there holding each other as the sun dipped lower. It amazed me how drastically life had changed in such a short time. I thought of the timid nurse I'd been, living quietly with my routines and lingering traumas. And I thought of the strong, fiercely loyal man beside me, once a stranger, now something much more. Fate had thrown us together in the unlikeliest way. A plane crash, a rescue, a battle for our lives. As insane as it sounded, I wouldn't trade any of it, because it led me to him. "What's on your mind?" Nikolai asked, watching my thoughtful expression. I grinned up at him, just thinking that I finally understand why I was there on that beach that night. "Oh?" He raised a brow, intrigued. I stood on tiptoe and kissed him once more, softly. "I was there to save you," I whispered against his lips. "And maybe, just maybe, to save me, too." Emotion flickered across his face, something like love, depthless and bright. He didn't need to say the words back. I could feel them in the way he cradled me gently to his chest and rested his chin atop my head. Below us, the ocean stretched out vast and unknowable. The future, too, was wide open. I had no illusions it would be simple. Life with a Mafia boss could never be, but I knew with unshakable certainty that I wouldn't face it alone. As the sun slipped beneath the horizon, Nikolai and I stayed entwined, two survivors bound first by chance, then by choice. In the peaceful cadence of the waves, I swore I could hear the echoes of the vow we lived by now, to protect and cherish each other, no matter what storms might come. And together we would